When we talk about adults during the Elizabethan era, we have to use the word with care. Concepts of childhood, adolescence and adulthood are social constructs, i.e. they do not exist in objective reality, but exist only because humans in a particular society agree that they exist. If the agreement underpinning a concept changes, then the way in which the concept is applied also changes. If Romeo and Juliet were alive today in the 21st century, we would consider them teenagers in the early stages of adolescence. Shakespeare, however, would have scratched his head in confusion at these terms. The concepts of the teenager and adolescence, and the recognition that this period, between the ages of 13 and 19 for teenagers, and 10 and 24 for adolescents, is a separate emotional and physical developmental phase, didn't exist at this time. Children were perceived as small adults who transitioned seamlessly into adulthood. Note the way that the nurse's husband thought nothing of sexualising Juliet at the age of 2 or 3. "Yea," quoth my husband, "fall'st upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou comest of age." To 21st century ears, this sounds totally wrong and not a little bit creepy, but it wouldn't have been thought outrageous at the time. During the Elizabethan era, girls could be married at the age of 12, although only females from wealthy families would marry so early, often to men many years their senior for social advantage and to provide them with heirs. By Lady Capulet's own admission, younger than you, here in Verona, ladies of esteem are already made mothers. By my count, I was your mother much upon these years that you are now made. Lady Capulet herself can therefore only be about 26 years of age, although her husband is much older. At the feast, Capulet gives an indication of his own age as he reminisces with his relative about how they used to dance in their younger years. Nay, sit, good cousin Capulet, for you and I are past our dancing days. How long is't now since last yourself and I were in a masque?" Capulet's cousin responds, "Belady, 30 years. This puts Capulet perhaps in his 50s or 60s, making his wife much closer in age to her daughter than to her husband. By the age of 13, Romeo, Juliet, and the other young male characters such as Benvolio, Mercutio, and Tybalt would have been perceived as adults, with all the expectations to do with responsibility and behaviour, if not the privileges that come with it. Many children would leave the parental home at this age to take on apprenticeships, their childhoods effectively over. For the purposes of this discussion, however, young people will be taken to mean Romeo, Juliet, Benvolio, Tybalt, and Mercutio, and adults to mean the lords and ladies Capulet and Montague, Aeschylus, Paris, the nurse, and the friar. Shakespeare's 14th century Verona is a strictly patriarchal society, with a rigid framework in which the adult male heads of the family exert complete control over their respective houses, where the younger members are forced to defer to them in both their language and behaviour. The feud between the patriarchs of the two families both infects and affects the relationships between the young people. It is an ancient grudge, so old that we never even find out what caused it in the first place, which has broken to new mutiny, occasioned by the younger members of the houses, masters and servants alike, inciting violence in the streets. The feud between these older male patriarchs has been passed down to the younger generation, to whom it is actually irrelevant. Tybalt claims in Act 1, Scene 1, in his confrontation with Benvolio, that he hates hell, all Montagues and thee. And Juliet's own lamentation, "My only love, sprung from my only hate," demonstrates the extent to which even she, as a young and powerless female, has been brainwashed to believe the Montagues her enemy. The young are forced to act according to the needs of the older generation, who put themselves first. Throughout the play, the adult members of the families seem out of touch with the younger generation, misunderstanding them and alienating them in the process. Shakespeare sets up this intergenerational conflict right at the start in Act 1, Scene 1, when the elderly Capulet and Montague try to jump into the brawl started between the young servants. Old habits die hard as Capulet ridiculously calls for his longsword, an old-fashioned and very heavy weapon, to be brought, while the younger generation are sporting much more modern and lightweight weapons and bucklers. Montague struggles to break free from his wife. Lady Capulet's own response to Lord Capulet, hinting at his infirmity, a crutch, why call you for a sword?" only serves to make him look all the more ridiculous and out of place. The relationships between parents and their children also show evidence of misunderstanding. Shakespeare doesn't include any scenes at all between Romeo and his parents, as they exit in Act 1, Scene 1, just as he enters, and Montague only appears once more at the end after Romeo's death. In the relatively brief exchange between them and Romeo's best friend Benvolio, even though they profess to have their son's best interests at heart and only desire to help him, "Could we but learn from whence his sorrows grow, we would as willingly give cure as know." They seem unable to communicate with him, admitting that they and others have tried. But he, his own affection's counsellor, is to himself. They are seemingly unaware that it is to Friar Lawrence, his confessor, that Romeo entrusts the secrets of his heart. Friar Lawrence is a member of the Order of St. Francis, a monk who has taken vows of poverty and chastity. A father figure to Romeo, he is initially a calming influence on his life. Through his role of confessor, he is aware of Romeo's infatuation with Rosaline and has sought to counsel him against it, as Romeo acknowledges. "Thou chidst me oft for loving Rosaline." The friar, however, is a man of God and is not familiar with the ways of love. He remains unconvinced that Romeo's love for Juliet is any more authentic than that for Rosaline, opining, "Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." Once he finds out that Juliet at least returns Romeo's professions of love, he does, however, naively see the secret marriage as an opportunity to mend the feud that is currently poisoning the chance for peace in Verona. "In one respect I'll thy assistant be, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancour to pure love." The way in which he says, "in one respect I'll thy assistant be," suggests that this is the only reason that he is agreeing to the marriage. It is this underestimation and lack of understanding of the power and intensity of young love that will later contribute to the tragedy, as Lawrence puts his misguided attempt to bring peace to Verona above the welfare of the pair. We get a much better insight into the relationship between the Capulets and young people in their household than that of the Montagues. In Elizabethan times, sons were more highly prized than daughters, and Capulet has no male heir. The only means he has to increase both his wealth and social standing is, therefore, through a socially advantageous marriage for Juliet, and this is what he is seen discussing with Paris in Act 1, Scene 2. His admission that earth hath swallowed all my hopes but she reveals Juliet's status as a commodity to be traded for social advancement and consolidation of power. Note that she constitutes my hope. The choice of both these words revealing much about the relationship between adults and their offspring at this time. The possessive pronoun my indicates that Juliet is his property, a possession to be disposed of as he sees fit, and the abstract noun hope reveals that he sees the marriage to be for his own advantage, rather than hers. Caring for offspring was focused on material gain and stability, rather than emotional welfare. Marriages were arranged by the male heads of the family, and romantic love was not considered an important reason to marry. Paris is wealthy, and being related to Prince Aeschylus is the Capulets' social superior. Although Capulet seems initially concerned that Juliet is too young to be a bride, telling Paris, "My child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride." We have to wonder how genuine he is being at this point. Is he really concerned about Juliet's age, or is he just drawing Paris's attention to it as a selling point? He very quickly changes his mind about waiting and invites Paris to the feast so that he has an opportunity to woo her and get her heart. Any pretense of gaining Juliet's acquiescence swiftly vanishes on news of the death of Tybalt, as in Act 3, Scene 4, he unilaterally arranges the marriage with a mere 3 days' notice, decreeing, "Sir Paris, I will make a desperate tender of my child's love. I think she will be ruled in all respects by me. Nay more, I doubt it not." Note the use of the word tender here, with its connotations of a formal offer of goods, services, or money, reducing this relationship to the mere status of a business transaction. This strategic match has been made ever more important now that the feud has reignited with fatal consequences. Marrying into the family of Prince Aeschylus, who governs Verona, will consolidate his own position and power and give him an advantage over the Montagues. Lord Capulet's interaction with Tybalt at the feast also demonstrates the conflict between the older and younger generations. Capulet is not only authoritarian as a patriarch, but he is also capricious, changing his mind at the drop of a hat. Tybalt is not only outraged at Romeo for showing up uninvited at the Capulets' feast, which he takes as a personal insult, but he is also flabbergasted that Lord Capulet will do nothing about it. He rages, "Uncle, this is a Montague, our foe, a villain that is hither come in spite to scorn at our solemnity this night." Perhaps somewhat chastened by his audience with Prince Aeschylus that afternoon, and also reluctant to have a brawl inside his own home, Capulet does not wish to cause a scene. He commands Tybalt to be patient, take no note of him, reminding him, "It is my will, the which if thou respect, show a fair presence, and put off these frowns, an ill-beseeming semblance for a feast." Tybalt, refusing to be fobbed off by this, and undoubtedly seeing the hypocrisy in Capulet's words, forgets himself, saying, "It fits when such a villain is a guest. I'll not endure him." Children were brought up in the Elizabethan era to respect and obey their elders, and Tybalt's open defiance of the head of the family is shocking. Lord Capulet's takedown is swift and withering, not only demanding that Tybalt shall put up with Romeo's presence, but also warning him against causing trouble. He shall be endured. What, goodman boy, I say he shall go too. Am I the master here, or you? Go too. You'll not endure him? God shall mend my soul. You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You will set cock-a-hoop. You'll be the man. In order to remind the young Tybalt who is in charge, Lord Capulet repeatedly belittles him by attacking his masculinity. He calls him a goodman boy, or a child who has forgotten their manners. When Tybalt answers him back, "Why, uncle, 'tis a shame," he fires back with, "Go to, go to. You are a saucy boy. Is't so indeed? You are a princox. Go, be quiet, or—" Capulet talks down to Tybalt as though he is a small boy, calling him a princox, or a conceited and insolent fop. Being censured by Lord Capulet in this way only inflames Tybalt's aggressive nature the more, as not only has he effectively been told in no uncertain terms that he is a child, not an adult, but he is also forced into doing what does not come naturally, i.e. putting a lid on his anger. Patience perforce with wilful choler meeting makes my flesh tremble in their different greeting. I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall, now seeming sweet, convert to bitterest gall. What Capulet ignores is the fact that he himself has been the driving force in keeping the feud alive. He has been the one to teach Tybalt that the Montagues are their mortal enemy. He has endorsed the brawl earlier in the day by seeking to participate in it, but is then enraged that Tybalt wants to take matters into his own hands. Juliet is ultimately failed by both the female adult relationships she has in her life. Her relationship with her mother is cold, even though, as we have already established, the mother and child are much closer in age to one another than the mother and father are. Lady Capulet is not what we would consider a hands-on mother. Babies in wealthy families would have been given to a wet nurse for breastfeeding and care, and Juliet has been no exception. The relationship between mother and daughter is therefore very formal, as the two really do not know each other very well. Juliet addresses her mother as Madam, and Lady Capulet in turn addresses her as Daughter Juliet. Note the way in which she uses their family relationship as a means of address, which serves to reinforce their generational difference by reminding Juliet of her subordinate role. The way in which she brings up the subject of the proposed marriage is likewise cold and formal. She bluntly demands, "What say you? Can you love the gentleman?" It is clear from this question that she regards love as something that is bestowed intellectually rather than emotionally. Furthermore, showing obedience to her husband, she shares his preoccupation with the social advantage of the match. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him, making yourself no less. Juliet's own response to her is non-committal and evasive. I'll look to like, if looking liking move, but no more deep will I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly. She will expect to like him if seeing him is enough to make her like him, but she will not give him any more encouragement than her parents will allow. Her use of polyptoton here adds to the sense of her speaking in a bit of a riddle, and is another indication that there is perhaps more going on underneath the surface than is currently apparent. We get the feeling that if Juliet were to try to address the idea of romantic love with her, she would, no doubt, receive short shrift. The nurse serves as a foil for Lady Capulet. Foils are characters who, although sharing some similarities, contrast and highlight certain other attributes. Both ladies are mother figures, but although Lady Capulet is Juliet's biological mother, she has not nurtured her, and they seem to share no emotional bond. The nurse has been the one to nurture Juliet, and there is no doubt that she loves her, as though she were her own daughter. She uses terms of endearment to address her. What lamb, what ladybird, and tells fond, albeit inappropriate, anecdotes of Juliet's childhood, for which Lady Capulet's own absence is noted. My lord and you were at Mantua. From an inferior social class, she is uneducated and simple in her outlook. We've already seen at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 3, that the nurse only focuses on the physical side of love, of which she speaks with much bawdy enjoyment. She responds to Lady Capulet's statement that marrying Paris will make Juliet no less in status with, no less, nay, bigger women grow by men, transforming this into an allusion to her physical size, i.e. that a woman is made bigger through pregnancy as a result of the sexual act. Neither woman addresses the romantic concept of love, however, which is the only type of love in this society that does not feature either the social or physical oppression of a young female. As Juliet's sole adult confidant at this point, the nurse is ill-equipped to mentor her with either wisdom or foresight. Inferior in social class, she is, in reality, her servant, and not a mother. She does not have the authority to control her behaviour, even if she wanted to, and Juliet is also comfortable enough to communicate her disrespect for her, if not directly to her face. The dynamics of the relationship are shown in Act 2, Scene 5, when Juliet and the nurse are on their own, contrasting the youthful energy and enthusiasm of Juliet and the age and slowness of the nurse. Juliet has sent the nurse off to find Romeo and is impatiently waiting for her to return with news. She blames her slowness on her age, lamenting, "Had she affections and warm youthful blood, she would be as swift in motion as a ball. My words would bandy her to my sweet love, and his to me. But old folks many feign as they were dead, unwieldy, slow, heavy, and pale as lead." Juliet's love for Romeo has made her contemptuous, complaining that a lot of old people act as though they are already dead. Juliet needs her, however, and she cannot risk alienating her, as she herself would only be permitted to leave the house to go to confession. And she uses a combination of endearment, cajoling, and remonstration to get the required information from her. Everything starts to fall apart after Tybalt's murder, as the desires of the adults dictate the consequences of this event and cause the young people to act in ever more desperate ways. Prince Aeschylus decrees that Romeo be banished to Mantua rather than executed for the crime, inadvertently putting the young lovers in a state of limbo, while Capulet takes the opportunity to capitalise on the event by rushing into an agreement with Paris that he shall marry Juliet. Friar Lawrence hatches a risky plan in an attempt to avert his own performance of a bigamous marriage ceremony. In Act 3, Scene 3, there is conflict between Romeo and Friar Lawrence as he seems to blame the monk for being the messenger of the news about his banishment. "How hast thou the heart, being a divine, a ghostly confessor, a sin absolver, and my friend professed, to mangle me with that word banished?" Romeo does not take the friar's calm and philosophical reasoning well, which he rejects on the grounds that thou canst not speak of that thou dost not feel. Once more we can see that there is a disconnect between the young and the adults upon whom they depend. In Act 3, Scene 5, we have one of the most shocking scenes of the whole play, as we witness Juliet's heartless treatment at the hands of her parents. Capulet is anxious to cement the alliance of his daughter with Paris, and sends his wife ahead of him to break the news. Lady Capulet is cold as she berates Juliet for her tears, mistaking them for tears of grief at Tybalt's death. "Evermore weeping for your cousin's death. What, wilt thou wash him from his grave with tears? And if thou couldst not make him live. Therefore have done. Some grief shows much of love, but much of grief shows still some want of wit." The Capulet's solution to her grief is the speedy wedding to Paris. Juliet is in shock. Not only has she just found out that Tybalt is dead, but also that Romeo, her husband of less than a day, has been banished to Mantua. Her first reaction is outright refusal, citing the unnecessary haste for the rite. "I wonder at this haste that I must wed ere he that should be my husband comes to woo." Lady Capulet is not interested in her daughter's concerns and effectively washes her hands of the problem, leaving her to the mercy of her father's rage. "Here comes your father, tell him so yourself, and see how he will take it at your hands." She is then even harsher, showing a total lack of maternal love, when she tells Capulet of Juliet's outright refusal to marry Paris, adding, "I wish the fool were married to her grave." Capulet once more shows himself in this scene as the authoritarian, capricious patriarch that he has already revealed himself to be in his interaction with Tybalt at the feast. While Juliet remains calm and respectful, showing maturity in her care to separate her distaste at her father's decision from the love which inspired it. "Not proud you have, but thankful that you have. Proud can I never be of what I hate, but thankful even for hate that is meant love." Shakespeare demonstrates Capulet's own complete shock in the face of Juliet's defiance through his use of language, which breaks down into epizeuxis, where words are repeated in immediate succession, and rhetorical questions. How, chopt-logic? What is this? Proud, and I thank you not, and yet not proud, mistress minion you? Capulet, clearly unused to being openly defied by his female child, does not stop there, descending into a childish diatribe of name-calling and threats of physical violence. Thank me no thankings, nor proud me no prouds, but fettle your fine joints 'gainst Thursday next, to go with Paris to St. Peter's Church, or I will drag thee on a hurdle thither. Out, you green sickness carrion! Out, you baggage, you tallow-face! As he continues to rail at her perceived ungratefulness, he reveals his own attitudes towards parental love, which he believes is demonstrated in his having found her a suitable husband. Day, night, work, play, alone, in company, still my care hath been to have her matched. He then weaponizes her youth, using both that and her words against her as he mocks and mimics her. And then to have a wretched puling fool, a whining mammet, in her fortune's tender, to answer, I'll not wed, I cannot love, I am too young, I pray you pardon me. He leaves her with an ultimatum. Either she agrees to the wedding, or he'll put her out on the street. Her appeal to Lady Capulet's better nature fails, as walking out she tells her, Talk not to me, for I'll not speak a word. Do as thou wilt, for I have done with thee. Her relationship with her parents is now effectively dead, as the pair put her in a situation where she has nothing to lose. In The Nurse, Shakespeare creates a character who shows herself to be a very pragmatic person, living in the here and now, right from the start. In Act 1, Scene 3, she demonstrates her acceptance of her own daughter's death during infancy. Well, Susan is with God. She was too good for me. These characteristics, as well as her incapability of understanding the intensity of Romeo and Juliet's romantic love for one another, inevitably lead her to fail Juliet as a mentor. She now tells Juliet to commit bigamy and marry Paris. Beshrew my very heart, I think you are happy in this second match, for it excels your first. Or if it did not, your first is dead, or 'twere as good he were, as living here and you no use of him. She sees it as a simple answer to the problem, and as a way of getting herself out of trouble for her complicity in the affair. In the same way that she has accepted the death of her own daughter and has moved on, she thinks it best for Juliet to accept the death of her relationship to Romeo and move on. Unwittingly, she turns Juliet against her, her advice having the opposite effect to that intended, as Juliet declares, Go, counsellor, thou and my bosom shall henceforth be twain. I'll to the friar to know his remedy. If all else fail, myself have power to die. Juliet's fate is now in the hands of Friar Lawrence's risky plan, and without the nurse's complicity there will be no additional means of letting Romeo know, on his arrival, that Juliet still lives. Although adults try to dictate the destinies of the young, youth does find a way to attempt to take back control. In Tybalt's challenge to Romeo, and in Romeo and Juliet's own secret marriage, albeit with tragic consequences. By the end of the play, most of Verona's young people lie slain, with both the Capulets and the Montagues' only children dead, and the lineage thus broken. The influence of the houses is destined to decline. Shakespeare demonstrates that the self-serving attitudes of the older generation at the expense of the younger is, in the final analysis, paradoxically self-defeating. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.